Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Democracy Days 2020. My name is Michael Kelker from the Department of English. I've also been the organizer of this event since 2001, and I'm very happy to introduce to you two individuals to talk about disability, education, and democracy, Paige George and Tracy Bono. What we'll do is have a pre-recorded piece by each, and then for anyone who would like to offer questions or comments, please do so in the chat function of your Zoom frame, or click the link right below the stream on our page, Democracy Days, St. Charles.edu/democracy days. We will encounter this. I would like to remind you that we have a booklet for Democracy Days 2020. I've just posted it in the little chat function in Zoom, and I'll have that posted to stchas.edu/democracy days momentarily. But I'd like everyone to have the program, and I'd like everybody to be aware of the other 11 great sessions we have going on this week. So let's turn now to two people who have both personal and professional connections to this matter of disability and education. First, let's hear from Paige George.
Hi, my name is Paige George, and I'm the Disability Support Manager here at SCC. Today, we're going to be discussing the disability rights movement, and in particular, how it relates to education. I'll be presenting first, and then Tracy Bono will share her perspective as an advocate and ally in the field. We'll then open it up for questions and discussion. If you have questions, you can share those in the chat at any time. We'll address them all at the end. I'll also be sharing the recording of my presentation with captions added on the DSS page in the portal, in the SCC portal. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now and start my PowerPoint. Okay. All right, so the objectives today are for you to have a better understanding of the historical perspective of disability and the models that we use for viewing disability. We'll discuss the disability rights movement and the laws that resulted from it and how they pertain to education in particular. I'll also briefly discuss the rights and responsibility of students with disabilities in college. According to the CDC, there's 61 million adults that have at least one disability in America, or 1 in 4 Americans. Around 20% of these are considered serious, including mobility disabilities, but most are what we can call invisible disabilities, such as developmental and learning disabilities, chronic health conditions, and psychiatric disabilities. People with disabilities are the world's largest minority and the only one that you could join at any point in your life. So the policies and laws are going to be important for everyone to understand. And starting in the 1700s, the policies in the US have led to both discrimination and stigma for people with disabilities. Those policies include institutionalization, forced sterilizations that happened with regularity throughout up through the 1980s, and is still happening in some cases today. Restrictions have been placed on voting rights, work, and education, which led to limited social standing and power. Some of the earlier triggers for change in the US came from World War I and World War II veterans returning with acquired disabilities such as amputations. They demanded to re-enter society and the respect that they'd earned, which led to rehabilitation resources becoming more available. The civil rights laws in the 60s showed that the government could and should have a role in enforcing anti-discrimination in the US. And the independent living movement, which really took off in the 70s, played an important role as the process of deinstitutionalization started in the 60s. There were people with significant disabilities being released from their life sentences in nursing homes and other institutions. And this created for the first time in American history an opportunity for people with disabilities to live free and independent lives. The independent living movement started a community which empowered people with disabilities to live on their own and have access to the resources that they needed to live independently. So the disability models, or another way to think of them, is the framework that we use to view disability. We can see how it's changed over time with the different models of disability. The medical model has pretty much been the standard throughout most of history. The medical model views disability as a sickness that needs to be cured. People with disability are seen as medical conditions to be cured or treated. And the barriers for people with disability were resulting from their own biological limitations from the view of the medical model. It gives control to healthcare providers and caretakers and focuses on what people with disability can't do, not what they can. It also leads to public policies that encourage prejudice and discrimination against people with disabilities. The social model has been more recently developed, starting in the 60s and 70s. The social model views disability as a relationship with the individual and their social environment. It explains the exclusion of people with disability from social life as a result of segregation and sees the attitudes of people without disabilities as allowing the marginalization and creating the barriers to learning and employment. It's led to the civil rights protections and anti-discrimination laws that we'll talk more about as the proper response to disability. There's a newer model that's developed just in the past decade or so, known as the social justice model. This focuses on the elimination of ableism, which is defined as discriminatory practices against people with disabilities and social prejudice. And this focuses on the dignity and rights of people with disability, the social justice model. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the major federal disability legislation in the US. The first anti-discrimination law was passed in 1973. It's known as the Section 504. It applies to all programs and activities that receive federal funding, including both public schools and colleges. It was followed up in 1975 by IDA, which makes available a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. This led to the mainstreaming of students with disabilities and ensures special education services to qualified students. We're celebrating the 30th anniversary of the ADA this year. It's just been 30 years. It was the major civil rights law for people with disability, and it prohibits discrimination and ensures that people with disability have the same opportunities to participate in mainstream life. This was followed up in 2008 with the ADA Amendments Act, which was an important passage. It was passed to actually carry out the objectives of the ADA and add enforcement of the law. It was needed as there had been a number of court cases, including some that had made it all the way to the Supreme Court, that had made it really difficult to meet the legal definition of a person with a disability. The Amendments Act broadened the definition of disability and puts less emphasis on documentation. These progressive laws have led to an increase of people with disabilities participation in society, including higher education. In 1978, only 3% of college students had a disability. In 1998, it was up to 9%. And in 2019, particularly after the Amendments Act, it is up to around 19% nationally. Unfortunately, graduation rates of students with disabilities in college are still less than half of students without disabilities, so there is still a lot of room for us to improve. The IDA was an aspirational law, and this passage, I think, really kind of sums up what the goal of that law was. Tracy will share her perspective next, and she'll talk about a lot of the work that we still have to do to get there. I'll read it for those. Disability is a natural part of the human experience and in no way diminishes the right of individuals to participate in or contribute to society. Improving educational results for children with disabilities is an essential element of our national policy of ensuring equality of opportunity, full participation, independent living, and economic self-sufficiency for individuals with disabilities. There's also a picture of Gerald Ford signing the law in 1973. All right. So I want to talk about the difference between the IDEA Act and 504 and ADA. IDEA in particular as it relates to education. The IDEA applies only to public schools, K through 12. It's a law of entitlement, which guarantees success through a free and appropriate education in the least restrictive environment. You'll hear that term a lot. The school is responsible for identifying students with disabilities and assessing them. An IEP, Individualized Education Plan, is developed with special services. This is a legal contract with the school. The IEP may provide modifications of the curriculum and assessments. 504 and ADA apply to colleges, both public and private, in different ways. They are civil rights laws which guarantee access to all aspects of the education. Attending college is a privilege, not a right, and students must meet all the admissions requirements without disability factored in. Students must choose to self-identify and provide documentation of their disability. Colleges must provide reasonable accommodations, which we'll discuss more. These are there to level the playing field and allow the student to show what they know. Instructors are not required to make changes that would fundamentally alter the curriculum, and students must meet the same course objectives. The Office of Civil Rights, OCR, enforces the ADA in Section 504, and it finds resolution for discrimination complaints that are filed. OCR shares the enforcement of the ADA with the U.S. Department of Justice. Okay. So we'll talk a little bit about the rights and responsibilities of students with disabilities in college. In college, the student must choose to disclose their disability. We don't come looking for you. They will need to apply with the Disability Services Support Office, which is sometimes known as the Access Office at other colleges. They have to provide appropriate documentation as well. That can include, most colleges will accept an IEP or 504 plan from high school or medical report from their doctor. Each school sets their own documentation standards. So the student will need to be able to clearly articulate how the disability impacts the course of study, and they must be able to self-advocate with faculty and staff. The Disability Support Services Office is here to assist students in developing self-advocacy skills, as well as helping their independence, maintain their independence. We identify appropriate accommodations, and we work with faculty and staff to ensure that the delivery of those accommodations. We protect the students' rights of confidentiality. Their documentation that's submitted is not part of the student's record. The disability status is not shared without a signed release unless there's a need to know by the faculty or staff or someone else on staff. We're also here to protect the rights of students not to be discriminated on the basis of disability. And this is for students who choose to use our services and for those who don't. The DSS mission statement is listed here. St. Charles Community College welcomes and supports a diverse student body. DSS is responsible for ensuring accessibility for students. We advocate for an accessible academic and physical environment, and we work collaboratively with staff, administrators, and faculty. wanted to just talk briefly about the types of accommodations that we have at SCC and at other colleges. We provide accommodations for the assessment test and other exams, including extended time as well as reduced distractions. We have assistive technology resources. These include screen readers. We've made free options available for screen readers for home use during COVID-19. Speech to text software and other software and hardware are available in the assistive technology lab. We provide in-class accommodations like note-taking assistance, priority seating, the ability to record lectures. We have devices that can be used for this. We provide books in alternative formats, including enlarged print, braille, and audio options. We also provide interpreting and captioning services. These are examples of the types of accommodations that would be part of an accommodation plan at SCC. Accommodations in college don't include modification of the program requirements. We don't provide personal aids, including attendance or at-home assistance. We don't do behavioral management or change the code of conduct for students with disability. We don't monitor classes or make reports home to parents, and we don't provide accommodations that would pose a direct threat to self or others. So I just wanted to share some other resources and things to learn if you wanted to learn more about the disability rights movement. I would really suggest checking out the documentary Crip Camp, A Disability Revolution. It's out on Netflix now. It's a really amazing documentary about the start of the disability rights movement. It includes Judith Heumann, who was and still is a leader in the disability rights movement. If we have time at the end, I'll share the trailer from Netflix. It gives a really great representation of the movie. Hope you check it out. I would also recommend Judy Herman's autobiography, Being Human, and to get other perspectives, the Disability Visibility Project has put out a book of first-person stories from the 21st century, and it has essays and autobiography stories and from people with disabilities, and it gives a look inside of living with a disability today. So this concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to answer your questions at the end after we hear from Tracy Bono, and share my sources here if you want to check any of these out. As I said, this presentation will be posted on the DSS page in Canvas. All right, I think.
Hello, my name is Tracy Bono, and I'm adjunct faculty at St. Charles Community College. I'm also a disability advocate. The disability rights movement in our country has been around for a long time. You may be familiar with the civil rights movement as it pertains to people of color, but it is also about disability rights. It was in the early 1970s where we started to see this part of the movement get some recognition. The famous 504 sit-in demonstrations that took place in 10 cities in the year 1977 showed just how powerful and influential this movement and culture can be when it recognizes and pulls upon its strengths and organizes. Before the passage of Section 504 of the Disability Rehabilitation Act, disability was viewed as a diagnosis. It was viewed as a deficit. Children with disabilities were not afforded the same educational rights. After the passage of 504, people began to understand that disability is a result of the construction of our society. What does that mean? Our society creates barriers, creates systems that enables discrimination and inequities for certain groups of people, and then places value, control, and power into the hands of others. Special education is a social construction whereby a society can label and isolate certain children in order to protect the normal processes and sources of power. There are no limitations. There are no impairments if an enlightened society recognizes the worth of all its citizens and then operates accordingly. In 1887, Nietzsche said, Facts do not exist, only interpretations. Other legislation followed. 1990 ADA, IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Act, and we started applying and hearing all this lingo like IEP, Individualized Education Plan, FAPE, Free Appropriate Public Education, LRE, Least Restrictive Environment, lots of words, lots of interpretations. My son Frankie's an awesome kid. He loves to build and take apart motors. He rides horses. He's a huge Toy Story fan. He has some pretty sweet dance moves, and he's autistic. A few years ago, I found out that my son's public elementary school was not following his IEP, which is a federally legally binding document, and not providing him his ADA accommodations. And if that wasn't enough, I also learned he was being restrained. He was being restrained, and then he was being locked into a seclusion room. For those of you who don't know what a seclusion room is, it's a small, padded, closet-sized room. It's an ugly little secret that schools all over our country are using. I've since learned that we do not share this. Are not the only ones who have this experience. We share this with so many other children. It's a common occurrence. And according to the ACLU, the two demographics that are disproportionately affected by this and this abuse are children with disabilities and children of color. How far has this movement come since those famous sit-ins? Not far enough. In March of this year, the Food and Drug Administration banned the use of electric shocks that were being used to punish children with disabilities at a school in Massachusetts. Electric shocks, locking children in closets, abuse and discrimination, no accountability, no oversight, and this is happening at our schools today, right now. This is happening to our children, our future. My child was abused, and he was denied his right to a public education. He was also taught not to trust people in positions of power, and he was set on a track of failure by a system that funnels children with disabilities and children of color into a pipeline to public assistance and incarceration. It's a complex, powerful system fueled by an insidious social construct. My son now goes to a private school where he's safe, but he must pay tuition that we frankly cannot afford. He's been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. He's in therapy, and years later, we are still dealing with the damage that has been inflicted and perhaps always will. I'm working with some legislators and some groups in regard to legislation and advocacy, and I'll keep working. It's my small contribution because I'm not just going to help my son. I want to be part of a change in this movement, a positive change, to change this system, to prevent this from happening any further. We, allies, members, supporters, must come together and organize this movement in a new way. There's much work to be done, and this is no time to be passive, and this is no time to be compliant. It's time to shake things up, as we are seeing play out in the media today. We're seeing it play out in political arenas. We're even in our conversations at home. It's time to demand true civil rights for everyone. It's time to recognize that people do not always look and act the same, but are all truly equally valuable and deserve not just education, they deserve their rightful place in our society. The system's changing, and I hope you're going to be a positive part of it. I want to thank you very much for listening to me today, and I'm really looking forward and excited about discussing this further with all of you.
Okay, so we're live then? Is that what you're saying, Nick? Okay. Tracy, you're muted.
I could hear my video still playing.
I thought so too. Okay. So we are definitely live. Okay. All right, so we've got a few questions, it looks like. that were typed in from the chat. One was whether there'd been an increase in disability support services requests since COVID-19 and the pandemic. We've moved to all online and remote. And I would say not really. I would say we're still seeing about the same number of students this fall. They've been finding us a lot later than usual. Normally they just walk across campus and we're there. We welcome them and get everything set up basically in one step. I do advising as well in the disability support office. So it's kind of a one-stop shop when we're fully functioning. So in this fall, it's kind of been a little bit more coming in pieces. So I don't think everyone has found us yet that's going to. We're still seeing new students coming into the DSS office. I'm meeting with students mostly remotely right now. But we are seeing a lot more requests for assistive technology at home. And we've been working with students to get screen readers set up online, for home use and other types of assistive technology that students can use for free at home. That's been the biggest new thing that we've been dealing with this fall. Other than that, I think Tracy was going to talk a little bit about how the COVID-19 and working from home has affected high school students and with IEPs and elementary students, and that's been a much bigger effect. I think. If you want to talk for a minute, Tracy.
Yeah, well, as far as elementary school students, primary, high school, they're still working with their IEP plans, and I think at first, from what I'm hearing and understanding, is the education system was trying to do everything virtually, trying to support in a new way. But from what we're seeing kind of play out right now across the country, and I even think there was just a lawsuit in California that they're not fulfilling the contract of the IEP, that they're not focusing on it. We hear stories about parents getting messages from the teachers and the support saying, what is the one thing you want to really focus on? Let's focus on that. And the parents are saying, would you ask a typical student, would you only want to work on math or something like that? That's not acceptable. The IEPs are a federal contract. It's something that you're breaking the law if you're not focusing and trying to work towards these goals. And we need to use some imagination here and look at new ways of providing support. I think we had a chat there with a question. I just don't want to miss it. How did you find out about the unfair treatment that your son was experiencing? So some people never find out. Let's just say that right away. There are situations where there are children who are nonverbal, who are exhibiting behaviors, and they're being, told that these behaviors are just the child. My son was having, he had a very difficult time communicating, still does, but at the time it was even worse, and being able to express himself. And he was just saying things like blue room, and he was just he was just a mess about going to school, and he was having these these behaviors, like he was like fight or flight, kind of, you could see it. And a lot of parents have to play detective and figure out what is going on with my child. And I fortunately was able to piece things together and confront the school. It was the Francis Howell School District. The Francis Howell School District is awful about this, as are many others. But I was able to confront, and I was able to get a confession. And I said, I want to see the documentation of when my child was locked in these isolation or seclusion rooms. And the teacher said, oh, I just didn't document it. I don't have that. I didn't write it down. And there's no one is held accountable. No one is held accountable. There's no accountability. There's no oversight. They can do whatever they want. They can or cannot document it in any way they like. It's quite unfortunate. Let's see what that other question was. We have a question saying, as a mother who has a child with disability support services at school, how can I empower him not to view that something's wrong with him? Good grief. I would hope that no one is saying, everyone
needs accommodations for something, whether you need a ladder to climb up somewhere because you're not tall enough to reach it. I mean, it's all the same thing we're talking about. We're talking about social constructs again. If it is being viewed and is being approached as something that is done out of charity, well, then that whole thing is wrong. It's not. Everyone deserves the supports they need to be successful in our society. And every child and every person needs to know that they are worthy and deserve the accommodation and support to be a part of our society. I might have over-answered that.
One thing I would also say is, as a teacher, building what we call universal design into your classes actually can take some of that stigma away, I think. Universal design basically means where we build the support into the class. So it's neat. It's what an example of that would be curb cuts, and it's just a physical example, one of the best examples. So whenever we put curb cuts into the sidewalks, it was done originally for wheelchair users, and now we see people with carts, people with baby carriages, people, all different types of people find those curb cuts to be a useful addition to the architecture. So same thing in classes, we can build in what we call universal design for learning. And some examples of that would be teachers providing the PowerPoints and resources for all students, and not specifically, just making students with accommodations have to come and ask for them, or creating different types of assessments. So some students learn better doing, verbal assessments. Some students might be able to show what they know better by showing what they know versus, doing a multiple choice test. So giving options in how students are assessed. So that can take some of the stigma away when we see that everybody learns differently. We all have different learning styles. We all have different strengths. And that's one of the things I talk about when I'm talking about self-advocacy. Self-advocacy with students is not just about knowing what your weaknesses are, but also knowing what your strengths are, and being able to share that with your faculty, and talk about, I'm sorry, my dogs, it's a joy of working from home. But yeah, that's advocacy is being able to show what your strengths are too. So it makes our jobs harder. I'm gonna go back up, and so I don't forget Courtney's comment up above. We actually have a DSS Canvas workshop, but that is specifically for students who receive services through DSS, and that's just a way that I share resources and updates and make important announcements. But we do have we have a portal page. It's under the student support services in the portal. So I will be sharing, we'll be sharing that there with the captions. So that's what I was referring to early on in the presentation. So Courtney, you mentioned you'd like to let OTA students know how to access these services. This is where I wish I could ask you a question. But when you say access these resources, are you talking about just the presentation? Are you talking about accommodations in general? That's my question about that. So so if you could type your answer there, that might be helpful. In terms of sharing and how students actually get to me in terms of resources in receiving accommodations, I get referrals from instructors all the time. I get referrals from the nursing department a lot. Students who are dealing with anxiety over the high stress testing. So, if you do have to turn in some type of documentation, but I work with faculty quite closely about that and getting those types of documentation in place for students. Okay.
So there, can I address the comment? Would you mind? So we do have a comment on here. It says, when our president makes fun of journalists with disabilities, it makes our jobs harder. Was a comment that was sent to us. And when anyone is exhibiting that sort of behavior, I think it depends on my mood with how I handle it. But this is seen often. And I try to provide as much education and enlightenment as I can. I find that it is helpful. I have found that people are willing to listen and are willing to open their mind to the possibility that they might be being insensitive or offensive. And by following the lead of other people who are doing that and kind of not realizing that they're just following the pack in regard to that. And so I try as much as I can, this sort of thing. I get invited to be a speaker. And then honestly, when I'm just out and about and I am seeing discrimination and I am seeing disparaging comments and I'm seeing this sort of attitude, I think it is best to help people understand how it helps them. People will listen and pay attention and change their behavior if they think it's going to positively affect them personally, and it will. The chances of you having a child or a grandchild with a disability is pretty great. Someday you may be in that situation, and someday you are going to wish that you had started having a better attitude and started participating in a different way a long time ago, because chances are it will affect you personally. I think children too, if you are teaching your children to respect and welcome people with disabilities, it's going to help your child. It's not charity. Your child's going to grow up and be in a world with a lot of different kinds of people. And if they know how to adapt to different kinds of people in the workplace, in society, they're going to be more successful. So I think that question, I went kind of broad with it, but it's a big picture thing here. It's about making people understand that selfishly it will benefit them if they change their attitude.
All right, thanks, Tracy. So do we have any other comments? That I've missed. Let me look here. Asking about the DSS page in Canvas. Michael, have you got any other comments that
Let me just interject that a few people have commented quite favorably about the nature of the presentation and the importance of the subject. I have not conveyed all of the applause to you through the chat here, but in terms of the questions, you've addressed the questions that have been articulated.
Okay.
And this has been outstanding. I think in terms of the inclusiveness that is inherent in democracy, you've taken that abstract notion of inclusion and concretized it really, really well. And if you had anything else to say about this subject in terms of democracy itself, that might make a good conclusion. I'll check to see if we have any more questions or comments.
I would like to say, in regard to civil rights and this being a civil rights issue, I think we need to be aware of how we're talking specifically about disability, and I think Paige and I have already kind of been talking about this, how it plays into the larger topic of civil rights and our citizens having a rightful place and no one above the other and receiving any kind of respect or civil rights. I have been working with the Missouri ACLU specifically in regard to the school to prison pipeline. And it's such a horrible system that starts at a very young age, and people, don't realize that even if you don't have a disability and you're not part of that program, you will be paying for services that they will be providing. If a person ends up in public assistance, if a person ends up incarcerated, that will be coming out of your pocket. People understanding how, and again, it's that idea of how having people understand how it personally affects them is the key for people buying in to do the right thing. I wish it wasn't, but it is. For you understanding the larger picture of society and how we are all connected and how it will benefit all of us by doing the right thing and respecting civil rights and ensuring that those kinds of systems are not in place and people are afforded equal opportunity.
And I don't know that this is exactly what you mean in terms of democracy. I'm just going to share a little personal experience. If you think about the ADA is just 30 years old. I mean, that still boggles my mind sometimes when I think about it's only 30 years old. I was a senior in high school when the ADA was passed. And I think about my time in higher education and how much things have changed. I've worked in higher education since 1994, basically. And when I was originally working in a private university, I won't name names, but the whole role of the disability access person was to make sure that the students who needed a class moved to the first floor was moved to the first floor. And that's basically what they did, their whole role. And so much has changed in the last 30 years. And the number of students who are accessing college or coming to college. And a lot of that is just through representation, people being there is a lot more representation out there now, so that there is a lot that has, and students receiving services in high school that are seeing, I can't go to college. There is so much more built in to facilitate that now. So I think we've come a long way, but we still have so much farther to come. And I think that's basically, I know that doesn't really relate to democracy based specifically, but it is. That's the way I, what I would want to end with. Do you want to address the question the comment that just came in, Tracy, about the R word and how that has the effect that has on your family?
It would help if I unmuted myself. So I'll read it aloud. It says, I am still hearing the R word used regularly in my rural county. What could I do to convey how harmful the use of this word is to the individuals both in and outside of the community of disabilities? This is a really hot topic. And this is a hot topic in the disabled community itself, because so many people are owning and claiming words. For example, it used to be, we have to be politically correct and say you are a person with autism, right? That used to be, it was called person first language. It was really hot for a while, like early 90s. Paige, remember that when everybody was like, you have to recognize.
It's still going strong in the disability rights. Person first language, yes.
Person first, because we want to recognize that they're a person and not, but people are saying, no, this is me. I have autism. Defines me. I'm claiming that word. And so specifically in the autism community, people are saying, no, I'm autistic. Say I'm autistic. I'm proud of it. You can call me autistic. So that R word, though, is such a dated word. The R word is so incredibly dated, and it has such negative connotations to it that pretty much the only time anyone is ever using that word is to say something negative. And therefore, when you hear it, automatically people get, ugh, because it's only pretty much used in a disparaging way. So I think we have to listen to people who own the words, the people that are affected by the words, and say, what do you want? How do you want to be addressed? How do you feel comfortable with this? We need to really be careful, because I've had people tell me, no, you need to recognize them as a person first. And I say, why don't we ask them what they want? Let's ask them what they're comfortable with. But in regard to the R word, I will completely agree kind of with that comment. It is only used disparagingly. No one owns that word. No one likes that word. It is only used as a way to punish and isolate people.
I didn't really get into language a lot, but I have whole presentations that I've given to communications classes about language and disability. And there's a whole culture behind different words. The deaf community does not like person first language either. They have embraced it is a culture, deaf culture, capital D deaf. And so there is a whole lot of language issues. In terms of the video or the movie that I referred to, Crip Camp, Disability Revolution, another word that I would never use in my language would be cripple, crip. It's kind of like Tracy said, different cultures are embracing language, but it's one of those things where I can say it, but you can't. And that is another example of it. someone is saying person first language. I agree. Person first language is still being taught. And that's what I use in most of the time. And for those of you who don't know, person first languages would be like a student with disability, a person with disability. And I put that throughout my speech too, or throughout my PowerPoint. And because if I don't know, that's what I'm going to use. But Tracy's right. There are a lot of different communities that have embraced different language, and autistic students would be another example of that. And it's but the R word, I mean, when it's, I see a lot of, I think kids today understand the power of that word. I think it's starting to work its way out of language use, but as an insult that really, just kind of, I know I have nieces that I correct constantly. And it is, something, so they'll get to where, I'll just won't say that around Paige, but no, I don't want that. I don't want them to say it ever, So what's the other? Disability is not a brave struggle, encourage in the face of adversity. Yes, that's a great quote. Thank you. I'll read it for those who can't hear it. Disability is not a brave struggle or courage in the face of adversity. Disability is an ingenious way to live. So I actually have a sign in our office that has that quote on it. So poster. All right. Did you have any other comments?
No, I thought that was a beautiful way to end it. And I think that until people realize that it affects you personally, and it is not a charitable thing, is not a taboo thing, that's when we're going to really be making some good progress, when people do realize exactly that. I just want to thank Michael. I want to thank Paige very much for allowing me to participate in this today. I'm quite honored.
Thank you both. This was an outstanding start to Democracy Days, and you've been wonderfully specific. And this is so central, really, to our nation and to us in what we do as educators. All right. So that will conclude it, I guess. Thank you again. Thank you all for attending, and see you at 11:30.